the Make Space for Growth podcast. My name is Sara Vicente Barreto, and I'm your host. I'm a corporate strategist, problem solver, social entrepreneur, writer, mom of two, and passionate for growth, at home, in business, or in my community. Today, I'm bringing you the launch of Season 3, Creating Space. In order to tell you a bit about the upcoming season, I felt like I needed to go back in time and explain my concept of word of the year, because space is my word of the year. For the last 3 years, I've defined myself a word. Why a word? Well, I have values, vision board, goals. I found that a word goes beyond and through all that. A word gives you a little bit of a true north. In 2020, my word of the year was believe. And the belief really helped me keep it together. Do you remember the year of COVID? So I ended up acting through the year, or most of it, with a belief in myself that I actually did not think it was possible. One that I don't think I had lived before. It was actually believing in myself in a way that it was a bit blinding, some people might call it dumb, but also re-energizing. It made me kind of float ideas, see the positive in crazy times, find new avenues, unleash a bit of dreams, launch this podcast. When was the last time you actually believed that your dreams would be possible, that you are possible? Somehow along the way, the beliefs were also shaken, let's face it. But I fought quite hard to take the word back and kind of bring it back to the center of my life throughout the year, and especially to year ends. And I did not let go. In all honesty, I actually thought maybe I keep it as a word of the year for 2021. However, I kind of thought that would be lame, and given I was at it, I had to find a new word. And so I took the next step on the belief highway, at least the one for me. And I thought, well, believe can lead to one thing, which is no fear. And as I reflected on how I wanted to look forward to 2021, I did find a little bit of a theme of courage there. One that, stemmed from this new belief that everything was possible, and that maybe I could do more than originally I thought I could. And I did feel like courage was needed to feel stronger, to kind of stand up again against, all of this that we had been through. And I debated through the words bold and brave and fearless. I hesitated. I was a little bit afraid. Fear again. Fearless maybe is a bit of a negative word, like you don't have something. Is that when you add fearless less to something, is it a real word even? Maybe it needs to be bravery. And so I kind of wondered, do I even want fear in my word? But after the year of COVID, we did live with more fear than maybe in many past years, whether for us or for others or the world in general, for different things. And so I recognized that if you want to be bold, you want to be brave, fear exists, right? And so what I wanted was to be fearless in the situations where maybe I was hesitant and I wasn't sure. And that was no doubt a driving north. That was really a guiding force through the year. And in moments of doubt, of quite a lot of hesitation and fear, a choice was required, and I carried on. And this is them going back in time in a way to actually explain why space, and why I even talk about space, because I think it's been a bit of a process, and this concept of words ends up being important. I actually always end up asking our guests about what is their word of the year. So now for me, it's space. I took a little bit longer than usual to land on my word of the year for 2022. Maybe because I needed some space to reflect on it. As I reflected, there was a theme that kept coming up in my gratitudes. It was space, the small bits of space I felt was rejuvenating, the small bits of space to think, just small little bits that were coming up and that kept getting repeated. So I decided to dedicate this year and the season of the podcast to the ability to find, create, enjoy space in our lives. Now, what is space? Space, in a way, it's a limit, which is a little bit contradictory. No matter how much change we try to effect in our lives, space needs to exist for us to actually allow ourselves to shift something. It used to make it made me think of those sliding puzzles where you have to shift pieces around to fit the others without even being able to take one out. Do you know what I mean? And that is how I've been operating in the last few years. There are a number of things that coexist, and I keep shifting them around without taking anything out and limited availability to stack anything I want in. And so after quite a few feelings of suffocation, I did realize I wanted to feel a little bit more like Zizi. If you don't remember her, she was one of my last guests of the prior season. And she used the word limitless. And it blew my mind. It was really something that I aspire to feel a little bit more like that. And with this in mind, I felt I wanted to move away from shifting pieces in a puzzle to really redesigning the whole limit, the whole thing. And for that, you need space. So I've spent the last few months taking a step back in quite a lot of things in my life to allow myself the space to breathe and slowly figure out what was important, what I miss, what maybe does not have a place anymore or has a place right now. And as a first step, I needed space, which is why it took me a little bit longer to come here today. So why space? I was wondering, and I did write a little bit about this at the beginning of the year. Space is key to explore. And I've just finished reading The Essentialists, which is a lot about how we live our life in a more essential and intentional manner. And so I've committed to explore more, explore what I feel, explore what I want. And I've had many opportunities to do things throughout life, don't get me wrong, but I never approached them with the perspective of exploring it. If you're wondering, explore was one of my alternative words of the year. But what I've done in the past was not an exploration. It was, I want to try and explore now without an end in mind, or with just the opportunity to learn about myself and what surrounds me. And as I meet new people in the podcast, I feel like each of them has explored the life in a different manner, and each of them gives us a chance to explore a little bit about ourselves. In the past, I think it's been much more of an exploration in a closed space, which I don't think you can call it an exploration. It's more of a lab experience or an experiment. And that's not what I'm looking for. In fact, I know too much about controlled environments. And I want the space to explore without always being in control of all the variables, or perhaps without thinking the variables of what they are at all in one point in time. I do wonder how that looks like. I'm not quite sure. The other part about having space, and that I really value immensely, is the space to think. And that I really want to figure out how our guests find this space. This is the one I miss a lot, and I was missing it more and more at the end of the year. I was missing at work, at home, at the charity, everywhere. One of the ways I was visible that I was missing space to think was because I wasn't writing anymore. And writing is how I think, and it's how I process things. And even that got stopped towards the end of the year. It got squeezed out of my schedule when I was just at the point of exhaustion, and I decided that I had to stop. Most of what I was doing that was non-essential, or so I thought, in a way. But I did miss it. And there was a time I realized how much I lacked the space to think. It was the first week of January, and I went back to work. Many people are still out, so the calendar's not really full. And I created in a week what I was not able to create in like a full month the year before or more. Not from a productivity standpoint. I could still be pretty much of a productivity guru sometimes, but more from a creative standpoint, just thinking of foundation pieces, drafting a new structure, or looking at areas of focus that I never have time to do that. And that week was, it could be a distant memory because it was January, but I did seek to recreate that throughout my year. And I do feel like my ability to create and add value in all areas of my life depends a lot of me creating this space to think. The other part about space, and that gets a bit trickier, is the feelings, right? The feelings, the famous ones. Now, I have a pretty strong autopilot. Whenever there is the slightest discomfort, I just go into problem-solving mode. Good luck trying to stop me. It doesn't matter what the problem is. There is no space to connect with what's happening, that usually comes after the matter, if at all. And this year I've been working really hard to allow myself to feel in the moment that I feel it, and not to rationalize it, not to talk my way out of it, not to justify, not to try and go in circles in my head, but just kind of be there. And look, it's been a bit tricky, I must admit, but it's been quite enlightening and a bit liberating sometimes, not to have to immediately act on something and to just give it space and to just allow yourself to be there. And good or bad, I'm inviting feelings to stick around for a little bit this year. They're kind of welcome, or at least most of the times. And the other part about space, which I think almost puts all of this together and why space is kind of the focus of all this, is the space to be. Exploring and thinking, they can often lead to new ways of being, right? And I do want to create a space to be without apologizing, be without feeling guilty, be with a sense of being that is here and now. I want to use the space to discover what that means. And you may think that I've lost my marbles through my latest round of COVID, which is entirely possible. But I did think like that even before COVID. But as I dedicate this year to exploration, I do want to allow myself to find out what it really means and what I really value and what am I all about. It's spooky, but I'm sure we'll be connected on that. Space is not a single event in time. It is something you continuously need to have. So as we go through this series, I will speak to our guests about their path, their business, their careers, but also about how they find space, how they make space for what's important, how they define it, space to explore, to think, to feel, to be. Join me for this journey to find out how. It is time to create space.